Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on supporting English learners from a distance. My name is Hannah Liedl, and I'll be moderating today's discussion with our panel of experts. I'm personally very excited for this conversation. In addition to my role as Director of Social Impact at Whiteboard Advisors, I'm also pursuing a master's in teaching focused on English for non-native speakers. So today's topic is a passion area of mine. Before we dive into introductions and the discussion, I want to flag that we will have an opportunity for our panelists to answer questions from the audience before we wrap. We ask that you please use the Q&A function on Zoom. It should be at the bottom right of your screen, and just drop in any questions that you may have throughout the discussion. Without further ado, let's do a quick round of introductions. If our panelists could turn on their audio and video. And Diane, can we start with you?
Hi, sure. Hi, Hannah, and hello, everybody who's joined us today. I'm Diane Stair-Fenner, and I'm the president of Support Ed. We are a woman-owned small business based in the Washington, D.C. area, and we provide professional development and technical assistance to school districts and states and the U.S. Department of Ed. I'm a former ESOL teacher, and I've also written 5 books, and I have one more on the way, all about teaching and advocating for English learners. Hi, thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Katie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Nielsen. I'm the Chief Education Officer at Voxy, which is a web and mobile platform that we use to teach English to learners all over the world. I've been with the company about 10 years, and before that, I spent about 10 years working with English language learners, building online courses, evaluating how well they work, and generally working on distance language learning. My PhD is in second language acquisition, and I've worked on technology-mediated language instruction my entire career.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Matt, can you say a few words about your work?
Sure. Thank you, Hannah, and hello, everybody. My name is Matt Moldano. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Special Populations at the Texas Education Agency. I oversee, as part of my role, I oversee the services provided to English learners, as well as highly mobile at-risk students and students with disabilities being served under special education in 504. My experience has been, for the first 15 years of my career, I spent as a classroom teacher and administrator in a community of about 45% English learners from the Pueblo communities and from the Latino communities of North Central New Mexico. And in the last 10 years, I've spent my time as a state leader, looking at policies that impact special populations, specifically English learners.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I'd love to start the discussion with your perspective as a state leader. You know, what are some of the most significant challenges related to supporting English learners that you or districts in Texas really have faced during the pandemic?
Well, that's a big question. I think the biggest challenge has been general, not just for English learners, generally understanding how to mobilize services that you had traditionally done in a brick and mortar setting to mobilize those services. It's a little bit more pronounced when you think about the impact on English learners because of the unique skills and/or services that are being provided by very specific individuals on campuses and their limited ability potentially to interact with English learners. So I think that the initial impact was really kind of like almost a paralysis. How do we actually engage in these with these families and these students and make sure that they're being provided the services that are necessary. From a state level, that becomes a little bit of a difficult situation for us because where we're not directly serving the students, we have to continue to make sure that school districts and charter schools are providing the services and essentially serving as that accountability and compliance office. But then what are the types of solutions are we coming up with? So not just saying, here's what you have to do, but potentially here are some potential opportunities for you to capture that. And in the initial months, I think that we spent a significant amount of time providing very specific guidance to districts so that they could capture whatever they had to do to provide the services, so they could capture it in very practical ways. And one of the things I told my team is this is kind of a unique experience in that the services to English learners have risen to such a heightened level in this school closure situation where we can potentially launch forward new ideas that people aren't thinking about. So how do we capture how do we capture the moment and make sure that people are thinking about it differently? There were people, we were actually providing guidance on how you best serve English learners, and it was now being read by not just the ESL teachers or the bilingual coordinators or the people that generally read those things who know that information. It was being read by chief academic officers that maybe didn't have a background with English learners, or even superintendents or leaders of that nature. And I thought that, and I feel like that's still one of our state roles, is trying to actually get that at a level where people that are not traditionally responsible for it are serving those needs.
Thank you. Yeah, I love your emphasis on new ideas and the opportunities that are brought through this. And I know that your organization, TEA, recently won one of the Rethink K-12 Models grants. And I'm curious if you see some of those new ideas and big opportunities as something that you can pursue through this grant. If you're able to share just at a high level what some of your priorities for that are.
Yeah, so I think I'm very excited by it. First and foremost, because it is specifically to serve English learners. And then we have coupled it with the state's requirement for bilingual education to be part of the program for English learners across the state. So one of the things that many people across the country may not know is Texas requires districts that have 20 or more students in the same grade level that are English learners to provide a bilingual program. And that's not necessarily at the level that we would like it to be, but it is something that's statutorily required that we would like to capture and move forward. We know that good bilingual programs can actually help our students to achieve at much higher rates and to really thrive in our educational settings. With that, what we've done is we wrote a grant that was developed basically to capture all of the research around the impact of high quality instructional materials and make those equitably accessible to English learners, specifically when you have bilingual programs. And in our case, 90% of our students are Spanish speaking English learners. So the bilingual programs having high quality educational materials that are in authentic Spanish language, whether that's in math or Spanish language arts or whatever other curriculum. Part of the grant is written to really expand that opportunity. That's not necessarily new or innovative, but it is targeted. The other aspect of it is around our professional development. And I think there are two steps in the professional development, is that one, the professional development would be for teachers to be able to authentically engage with parents in a more meaningful way. Often we think of parent engagement or family engagement as kind of like we send them information and they either respond to it or not. But the idea would be that we train families on how to actually engage with families we train teachers on how to actively engage with families of English learners. But then we also are not limiting the training or the professional development to just the specialists, the ESL teachers, the bilingual teachers. Many and most of our English learners are served by multiple people that actually don't understand all of the skill sets that are required. And so one of the things that we want is to engage all of our teachers to have real working knowledge of how to engage students and families of English learners. But I think the most innovative aspect of it, and it's still like my aspirational hope that we can get to this level, is the idea of family engagement, creating avenues of family engagement that now actually on the family's terms, and I'm going to use that as a way to say it, but that we're bringing in families on their terms in order to both understand what is the curriculum that is being expected of their students, how do we engage them in that curriculum so it's accessible to them, their families of English learners assume that they bring assets as families to the educational setting and assume that when we tap into those assets that their students are going to benefit from tapping into those assets. And so what would that look like? And I think that the idea of using a digital world to do that is not far-fetched. I think we can tap into that. It just means that we have to be intentional about the process, and we have to be intentional about what we're trying to achieve with that. And so I'm literally looking forward to this next stage of building into this process.
Awesome. That's all incredibly exciting. And I feel like there's so much to unpack there. And it makes me think, one of the biggest challenges that I've heard from teachers throughout the pandemic is related to what you were talking about in terms of engagement, engaging students, engaging their families, particularly from a distance. And, we know that for ELs, the importance of engagement is twofold. So how are you ensuring that they are engaged virtually, coming to class, participating in class, but then also engaging with all of the different language domains, speaking, listening, reading, writing? Have any of you, Matt, Katie, Diane, come across tools or strategies that you see working particularly well for ELs in this regard?
Yeah, if it's okay, I can speak a little bit. So in terms of making sure we engage English learners or ELs in the 4 domains, is that what you'd like to hear about? Sure. So there are many ways we can do it, and we're very fortunate to be working with a network of teachers and administrators, and being able to support what they're doing in classrooms and now virtually. So there are a lot of great things that we've seen happening in terms of, especially in kind of getting the output from English learners, so the speaking and the writing. So some things for speaking or oral language that we've seen are having teachers and students record videos on Flipgrid where they're talking and where they're engaging, even if it's asynchronous, so not live. Sometimes we've seen teachers use an app called Seesaw to engage with students. And in general, just asking students to record a response. And the great thing about not doing it live is you can do as many retakes as you'd like, right? I'm sure when I'm talking today, I'll goof up several times, but we're live, oh well, we keep going. So one benefit of virtual instruction is that kids do have, and especially our English learners, they have a little extra time, right? So they can re-record, listen to a video a couple of times from a teacher where they can't do that face-to-face. So with all of the challenges, and everything we're working through, there are a few upsides, and that's one, that kids can have a little extra time to just process information and to produce information too. We've seen more examples of oral language, an activity called Choose the Best Image. So you can offer students on a topic you're working on, give them some scaffolding for responses, and we write about this in our Unlocking English Learners Potential book too. They could record a response, or they could work with a pair in a virtual breakout room to really talk and engage around a certain topic. You can also have them do a think aloud checklist, for example. If they're working through a problem, you could model that for students and again, record it. And making sure that we're offering scaffolding and supports like word banks and graphic organizers and sentence stems, which also, alluding to what Matt spoke about earlier, many of the strategies and supports will benefit native English speakers as well, or kids that need a little extra help. My own experience as a parent of 3 with online learning was, I was going through, as my kids are native English speakers. They were fortunate to be in a bilingual program in elementary school, but they needed extra help. They just couldn't, some of them couldn't do the tasks on their own. So I pulled out my ESL teacher tricks and, scaffolded my native English speakers' work. And just some kids need that extra boost, right, to be able to produce when they have to do so much more independently. I can keep talking, but I want to give others a chance. That's just kind of some info about oral language and writing, giving them those supports that I mentioned, sentence stems, sentence frames, chunking the writing process, making it in smaller bite-sized pieces. And again, that will benefit all students, and giving them checklists for self-assessment. Modeling is very important as well. What are we expecting to see? And making sure, if we can share authentic student work, that we also include work of English learners so they can kind of see themselves in that work. So I'll stop there.
No,
I was gonna jump in. One of the things that you said was about taking advantage of the benefits of virtual learning. When everything first went online, a lot of districts and teachers and students freaked out about how they were going to do what they do face-to-face in Zoom. And I think it speaks to what Matt was saying when you were talking about now is the chance to do something innovative. There are some things that the online medium is better for language learners. One of them is the chance to record and view their recordings and have more time. Another with writing is letting people work in collaborative documents. You were talking about letting English learners see models, like let them see other students' work from previous years. Let them see that the example the teacher gives that shows a perfect paragraph written by a native speaker isn't necessarily what everyone is expected to produce. And letting them work in collaborative documents with the teacher there giving feedback in real time is something that is impossible or really difficult to do in a face-to-face class, and helps English language learners get the extra scaffolding and support they need to improve their output with some extra support. That works really well for virtual learning. And as far as tools go, I think the tool itself is less important than making sure whatever you're doing, you reach your students. So I think there have been weeks of lost instruction because a school district says you're going to use Zoom, and then they're like, wait, no, you have to use Google Meet. And for some, especially for parent engagement, you should reach your parents however you can. Like if your parents want to text you or send you WhatsApps or do it on the phone, like get them communicating with the teachers and the administrators, and then you can move everyone to something that's more uniform. But just making sure there's a way for people to communicate is super important.
Yeah, I'm curious, Matt.
And I just want to say one thing to both what Diane and Katie had said. I think what we saw from a state level is to the idea of people in kind of a paralysis early on, and even still in this kind of hesitation mode, even though they're now starting to instruct, whether it's virtual, and some we have a lot of blended going on. But I think the big thing about it is understanding that just attempting it and getting started and thinking about your planning, like I'm thinking about from a teacher's perspective of planning. Now, this is just a different way of planning. So Katie said, really, whatever tools you're using, I would say you're going to still use those tools, but you're just going to use them through a different format. But I think the biggest thing is you're going to make mistakes, just like Diane mentioned. We're going to make mistakes on this webinar. And how do you actually capture them and collect those so that way you can move forward and become better at this? I think that's the big moving piece of not being stuck in hesitation.
And giving teachers a chance to talk to each other. Communities of practice are super important because so much of this is dependent on the local environment. So letting teachers have a time to share what's working, what's not working, and letting them help each other with specific problems is good. I saw a question that came in that I think is relevant to what we're talking about how do you give feedback on things like Flipgrid? Like the big problem with online learning, and we've seen it over and over again over the last 20 years, is that you have these amazing ideas for what to do with the online classes, and all of a sudden you have one teacher and you have so much more work, and it's all come in asynchronously. And how do you give students feedback? So one piece of advice for teachers is to try to not give yourself too much work to do where you won't be able to do all of it. Think of a way to let learners give each other some feedback, rotate who you give feedback to, have some small group time where you meet with students in small groups and give them real feedback so that you don't need to review their work later. But think through the feedback piece, because students will stop submitting work when they're virtual if they don't feel like they're getting any feedback on it.
Right, and in addition, Katie, I just shared in the chat a blog post I wrote, from perspective as a parent as well, like looking at all of my kids' assignments and working through them in the spring, just kind of some things that helped me keep in mind. And one was, having this clarity, right? We want teachers to try out new things, but maybe not everything at once. And especially for our English learners, like when we're using all these different platforms and apps, and like you mentioned, the platform itself isn't as important as the task, right? And the engagement. So I would advocate for keeping it simple at first, and then as students become more proficient with the technology, then you can, try something new. But in the beginning, especially in the beginning of a school year, when we have teachers that are trying to form new relationships virtually with students, and that itself is such a daunting task, not throwing all the bells and whistles technology-wise at everyone all at once. It can be very overwhelming for kids and overwhelming for parents that are trying to navigate this all in a language that they're also learning. So that's something I would want to, push as well.
Yeah, I mean, a good rule of thumb, and one that I give when I'm doing professional development for teachers, is pick technology that solves a problem. Like, don't choose the technology because it's cool. Choose technology that's going to help your students move the ball down the court, or whatever analogy you want to use. And that helps a lot, especially with language learning, especially with limited English proficiency adults and their children. Keep it simple.
That's super helpful. You know, we've gotten into some of kind of the details of what virtual instruction looks like, but I want to circle back to the idea of engaging with families, and Matt, as you put it, bringing in families on their own terms. What does that look like exactly? Like, what are the tools and strategies for doing that?
I'll talk about it from what our project looks like at the state level, and then definitely could talk about at the school levels as well. But I think what we're thinking about is, first of all, the intentionality around what we're doing with this. So all of the development is specifically around how do we engage English learners and their families, whether it's the curriculum and making sure that it's aligned and as rigorous and as equitable as any of the curriculum available. So that being one of the things, when I would talk about equitable access, we now have a priority on that. So that makes it equitable for these student groups. But I think when we're thinking about bringing in parents on their terms, we're thinking about also bringing like the language that's being used within whatever digital devices and or technologies we're using is being developed so that it meets the needs of those families in the language and understanding that they come to the table. Often we make assumptions about English learners and their families, which are deficit oriented. And what we need to do is flip that and say that our English learner families are on social media just like the non-English learner families. They're using all the same types of apps and devices. So us actually giving them access to that, but in their home language, and understanding with nuance, what the school's trying to achieve with the programs provided, whether it's a dual language program, whether it's a transitional bilingual program, or whether they're in an English language development class. Like, what are they actually trying to develop and what's the process for it? And then asking parents, like, what do you need from us? Like, often parents of English learners aren't asked what the school needs from them, or aren't asked to give input. They're just told, this is what we're doing for you. And I think that that's what I want to see differently, is the opportunity for it to be a collaboration and dialogue as opposed to just a one-way information share.
And when you're talking about social media, in letting them be in groups of other parents who speak the same language, they're often isolated. Like, parents will talk to each other once they see what the kids' assignments are. And letting the parents of non-native speakers have those same communities to communicate in their first language about what's happening goes a long way towards making sure the students are supported. Because, I mean, I have 2 children who theoretically should be able to explain what's going on, and they can't. Like, they understand one thing and they tell me what their assignments are, and then I go figure out that they don't understand what's happening. And it's made much, much worse when you don't speak the language of the community. So creating community groups for parents can help the parents support the children, which is all they want to do, no matter what language they speak.
Absolutely. And I would also recommend finding out which apps that certain language groups tend to use, because it can really vary by language group. So some groups, like, for example, using WhatsApp. So instead of making them adjust to what we want, how about we go to, what's they're most comfortable with, and, starting with that entry point and working our way up that way.
Absolutely. I want to switch gears just a little bit. Related to kind of student engagement, social language, what quality instruction for ELs looks like. We know it's not one size fits all. I guess, how are each of you thinking about addressing the needs of English learners that are at different life and language stages? So early learners versus adolescents versus adults and parents, and then also, recently arrived ELs versus longer term.
I can jump in with a couple of points. Yeah, it definitely starts with, as both Matt and Katie have mentioned, knowing what the strengths are, always starting with the assets piece first. So just, basing everything we do off of that. So for example, for newcomers, just giving them a lot of chance for small group discussions, maybe in breakout rooms, and structuring that. Having, for example, short recorded presentations, we want to make sure it's rich in content, but also strikes the balance with not being super overwhelming. Giving them resources that kids can refer to, like a virtual word wall, for example, a checklist for an assignment, just to make it, very clear. Embedding definitions in written work, that can be helpful as well. I also want to mention undocumented students. We should definitely pay attention to that group that's much more likely to disengage and drop out. And, we don't know yet what's going to happen as a result of distance or virtual learning for them. There's a really beneficial report now from the Migration Policy Institute on many Latino high school students fearing deportation and being more likely to drop out. We have to also be careful of bullying and online bullying as well. So those are a couple of things, just also thinking about different groups. For high school, adolescent, middle and high schoolers, giving them more choice in the content. Just as we as teachers, like if we're engaging in professional development, we like choice, but also offering the choice to students and what they can be doing. And let them have that space to share socio-emotionally, how they're feeling, and activities to build community, and that would cut across any group.
I totally agree. And one of the things that we can do better with technology is differentiate instruction. So you point out long-term ELLs versus newcomers versus learners who have chronological age doesn't match their language proficiency. These are all the problems in a face-to-face setting, because you have one teacher trying to work with a group of students who need all different things. We can use technology to give students exactly what they need. They can work at their own pace. You can move to a competency-based model. So you can get your students working with grade level appropriate material, to Matt's point, some of it in their first language, and then working towards having it in English, and give people exactly what they need when they aren't all in the same classroom, and really accelerate outcomes. Part of that, especially for the older learners you mentioned, choice is letting them be part of the language learning process, letting them have a sense of agency. If they understand that English is something that they're going to get by putting work into it, that they need to learn it by doing it, that it's going to be hard, but they have supports, that there are resources to let them make more progress more quickly, they'll be able to do it faster. And it speaks to that same professional development thing you said earlier. Having teachers who don't normally work with ELLs have some professional development about what it means to work with English language learners, how quickly they can make progress if they have the right materials, what to do with their writing, what kind of feedback to give them and what kind not. That kind of PD doesn't take very long to give them a crash course in optimizing outcomes for their English learners. And it could be really beneficial right now before everyone goes back to virtual school and we let all these people sort of be home and lost.
I would say that one thing that came to mind, and Katie, you touched on it, is the idea that because of language development not necessarily being, or English language development not necessarily matching grade level or age, the virtual environment allows us to basically separate and bucket kids into areas where they can get very, very specific instruction and scaffolding for their level of need. So the idea that you can only have a group of first graders in the same class at the same time, and they could all be at different levels, versus basically getting kids that have different level, because you could have a group of multi-age, multi-grade students that just arrived recently, and therefore have some very similar needs based upon your basic interpersonal communication skills, right? So those would be some different areas. The other thing, I want to tap into something Diane said, and it's really something that I think it was a learning experience. When I was a high school principal, I served a large Pueblo Native American population. About 50% of my population was Pueblo Native American, the other 50% Latino. In kind of a culturally and linguistically responsive aspect, the Pueblo students they come from a very communal perspective. They're not the type of student that the teacher in the front of the class asks a question that they raise their hand. And if the teacher says something and they don't get it, they're not going to raise their hand to ask the teacher to repeat themselves. When I became a high school principal, I started a virtual credit recovery system. I would make an argument it was probably the worst thing that I could have done at the time, but it was what I knew and it's what I had available to me. This was, 12 years ago. And so, but the one thing that I learned really quickly is we were able to tap into those students because they could actually rewind the lecture. They could rewind. And I think a lot about the idea of wait time. And often we become impatient and we create kind of a false success by the first person that gets the right answer, as opposed to letting the thought process for individuals. And when you have English learners who are trying to potentially translate that into, if the instruction's in English, having that wait time to be able to tap into it. The other thing is what we know is when we create aspects of success for students. So like I could coach kids through scaffolding to say, okay, we're going to do cold call today, but I'm going to coach you on some of the questions I'm going to cold call because I want them to show some success, but I'm not going to just cold call kids that might get set back. I can coach them, I can give them. Now when we have a virtual setting, that could actually be done virtually very, very, very quickly, right? So we can do that without having to go whisper in a student's ear or call them up to the desk or something sublime like that. We can actually do it through the virtual environment. So thinking about how we tap into this virtual environment to actually give more access and even be more strategic about our thinking it's going to be game changing, I think, for our teachers, and it can definitely should be game changing for our students.
Yeah, and a couple of things you mentioned, Matt, really resonated with me. And the first was just sharing our vulnerability, right? As human beings, and we're here, we're all tasked with doing something we've never had to do before, and modeling that and sharing that with our students, and hopefully that will help them feel more comfortable in taking risks as well in the classroom, and just kind of sharing what we're all going through. And then I also really liked how you mentioned basically setting our kids up for success, giving them a little heads up virtually, like, okay, maybe you can answer this question. Maybe if you don't feel comfortable saying it, you can write it, right? And whatever, if you're doing synchronous instruction, they could enter it in a chat, or as Katie mentioned, part of a shared Google Doc, where kids who are, a little bit more reticent in speaking, they won't want other kids to hear their accent, for example, all of those things like that, but they might feel more comfortable in writing or in an online setting. So it might enable kids who might not be the first one to raise their hand in the front of the class for whatever reason, to really kind of feel a little bit more a part of the classroom community. So I appreciate you saying that.
One of the common threads that I'm hearing from each of you during this conversation is that best practices for English learners are essentially best practices for all students, and that with best practices for virtual instruction for English learners, that's really just best practices for virtual instruction for all students. One, am I right in taking that as a takeaway? And two, what are some of those big things that you say, if nothing else changes from going through this pandemic, what are the things that we should be holding on to as best practices for all learners that might have stemmed from best practices for supporting ELs from a distance?
Can I jump in really quickly? And then I'm actually, my comment is pretty short, but I would actually say, I would agree with that, Hannah, except that we have to flip the script on it. Because you'll often hear people saying, well, good instruction for ELs is just good instruction. And that's actually not true. Good instruction for ELs is good instruction for everybody else, but there's a very intentional, sheltered and scaffolded methodology that is very much about intentional understanding of language acquisition and then academic language acquisition, which are not necessarily always happening at the same time, right? So you have students that are acquiring a new language that they're trying to speak and read and what have you, but then they're also at the same time acquiring academic language at the same pace that all of the other students that they're working with that are non-English learners are acquiring. So for teachers to actually have that nuance of how to serve English learners, it would absolutely benefit them in serving all students to what Diane and Katie have said. But I don't want to, it is very intentional. It's very, very specific as how you do good instruction for English learners.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we have to be careful. I think, as Matt mentioned, there are definitely nuances and intentionality to our practice and, keeping up with the research. And I would also want to add, working with families especially the family engagement piece is going to look very different for English learner families than it would for native English speakers. And also the pieces about bringing in the home language are so critical for English learners that just don't translate to native English speakers. Bringing in home language supports, allowing for and encouraging translanguaging. So we really do want to be careful. There's a great article from a few years ago saying that, you know, teaching English learners is good teaching plus. So it's the plus piece by Esther de Jong that we really want to hone in on and take advantage of and learn more about.
Yes, and making sure that people who don't ordinarily work with English language learners understand what that plus piece is super important, because they can make progress really quickly if they're given intentional support and they're given the right opportunities to practice using the language and to use their skills in a way that makes sense, so their more dominant skills get practice when they're struggling with the skills they're weaker in. But they can also just sit there and not get anything at all if they don't get the support that they need. So it's super important to not just say everybody needs good instruction.
And I just want to put one more statement on that. Regardless of the type of program that they're being served in, I think it's extremely important that with whatever instruction they are to acquire English and academic language, that there is absolute relevance being provided to the students in the instruction, so the students are connected to the instruction in more than just an academic manner, but in direct relevance. But then I would also say that that we do not devalue the home language in that process, and often that becomes part of a lot of service that's provided to English learners is well, we're going to get you to the superior language of English, as opposed to we're going to teach you a second language academically and in basic manner, but we're going to value your home language. Even if it's not in a bilingual program, you can still value the home language. And I think that that's a really important concept that we couldn't ever let go in this conversation.
No, and it's important for other students, especially in settings where you don't have English language learners alone, to appreciate the home language and the value that the English language learners bring. I mean, we should encourage them to use their home language with students who are taking that home language in the same school. And we should encourage people to use both languages and to understand the benefit of bilingualism and why adding English as a second language is a huge benefit that our English language learners are going to have. And they should never, ever lose their home language or stop practicing their home language. It's always going to be their mother tongue. They're always going to be able to do things in that language that are going to be more difficult for them in English, no matter how proficient they get, depending upon when they started learning English. So devaluing it is definitely not what we should ever do.
That's super helpful. I want to make sure we get to a couple of the questions that have come in from the audience throughout the discussion. Thank you to everybody who has been dropping those in. Here's one, if we want to start with Katie. It's a question specifically about you saying that to learn English successfully, you need to do the opposite of what we are doing now. I don't know if you can say more about that thought, but the question is, what components are quote unquote opposite in the current Voxy program?
Well, that's funny. I'm sure I've said that. I think that, I mean, I say things like that a lot. It's when we teach language as object and we teach people about how language works and we make them memorize grammar rules and fill out worksheets and be able to talk about the language as something that's isolated instead of teaching people how to use the language, which is everything we've been talking about in this conversation. We want to give language learners real world relevant tasks to do with the language they're learning, and we want to personalize instruction as much as possible. So it's not one size fits all. It's not like an ESL curriculum that you follow, but it's including support for English language learners in the curriculum that you have, because the more you can integrate what language learners do into their real goals and real world tasks and what the rest of the curriculum is for that age group, the more quickly they're going to make progress.
Awesome. And then another one is talking about EL teachers who teach in multiple grade levels and how they have to navigate between Seesaw, Google Classroom, multiple groups of students. And the question is, what are some best practices to manage all the different platforms and those different classrooms? And if there are systems that have worked for teachers in your experiences?
Yeah, and this is tricky, right? When we have L teachers who are working with different content area teachers at different grade levels and kind of navigating all of that. That's where I would kind of tap into advocacy a little bit to see, is it necessary to really work within all of those platforms? Like how much time are you spending on substance as opposed to the platforms, and how much bandwidth do you have to do that? So I would really take a look at what you have going on, and is it necessary? Are there areas where, you know, we can approach a co-teacher or a colleague and say, hey, you know, most people might not have any idea of everything that an L or ESL teacher might have on their plate in collaborating with so many teachers. So I would advocate for the L teacher kind of gently approaching the others and saying, hey, can we maybe narrow this down a little bit in terms of what I work on with you? If something seems super overwhelming, it probably is. So I would just suggest people take a look at what the workload is really looking like, because teachers are doing so much more work now than ever before to manage all of this in our new world.
I would echo that, but I would actually say if you kind of read some of the work, like Bambrick and Toyo and some of the you know, ideas around just being very, very specific in your strategies. You can only correct one issue at a time. You can't really correct 10. And so if you're new to the virtual environment, you may only be able to use one platform at a time for the first 2 weeks. And you can get really good at it because you're going to build some muscle memory around it. So my inclination is similar to like a new teacher, which doesn't necessarily happen often. New teachers in the classroom often struggle with classroom management, right? Like just thinking about brick and mortar. And so, but often we throw the book at them and say, okay, you got to do this, 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 and this. And all of a sudden they're overwhelmed. So they're overwhelmed with classroom management, but they're also overwhelmed with all the other aspects of teaching. That's just for a general teacher. So if I'm an EL teacher and I'm struggling with all of the platforms, I would focus on what is the highest yield platform that I can really gain some kind of expertise on, and then build out from that. In 4 months, 5 months, you might have 3 or 4 platforms that you're working on and you're doing it effectively, but you won't get there if you try doing it and just keep scrambling. So I would say start slow and you'll move fast if you learn it really well.
And try to find platforms that can integrate with one another, because students too, once they have to log into more than one place, they start getting overwhelmed. And if you can have one login and have it link back to other tools and have one central place learners go, like all of the research on distance learning, like once you have to log into 2 things, you don't go to the second thing anymore. So even if you're using a Google document to store links, like think of the simplest, easiest way for your students to access the information and get them really comfortable with that before you start adding a bunch of extra stuff.
Awesome. The next one's kind of a big question. How can teachers improve student attendance and participation while keeping in mind the digital divide? So students who may not have access to Wi-Fi or devices.
I would say, I think people thinking about like a butts and seats model for distance learning is a mistake. That thinking about a synchronous time when everybody needs to come together and engage in a specific Zoom meeting, especially with younger learners, and that it makes more sense to get learners to engage how they can. So some of them might go to a Zoom classroom and some might not be there. So try to figure out, if you can, what's keeping your students from going. Is it they don't have access to a computer? Is it that they can't be online at that time? Are they uncomfortable being with all of the native English speakers and turning on their camera and participating? And this isn't limited to English language learners. There are lots of reasons some students are more comfortable than others with video calls. And rethinking how we get study time and how we measure study time is an important step to make. We know one size does not fit all. Let's use this time to try to find a different way to operationalize engagement and participation, and use asynchronous methods and work around students' needs, and try that instead of making everybody conform to a Zoom replacement of a face-to-face model.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, Katie. And I also think on the flip side of that, there are many districts, right, that already mandate it. It's kind of coming from the top. It's mandated that the students will have the, you call it butts in the seats. I like that. They will have that time where they're supposed to be, taking part in synchronous live instruction. So, you know, thinking of both sides of that, like we definitely want to give teachers a voice in helping design those systems, but when the systems are already in place, what do we do? I just shared in the link a great resource, which is a Facebook group called Advocating for ELLs. And there are about 6,000 members. And I just read about this recently about an ESL teacher who just couldn't get the students to show up last year in the spring, but this year she's had like 94% participation. And I asked, you know, what did you do? And it was, her suggestion was collaborating with the content teachers, with the grade level teachers, to make sure you have that collaboration, that collegiality, so it can be coming from both teachers, from both the ESL teacher and the grade level teacher, that attendance, you know, is counted. It's mandatory to show up to the live instruction, but also making it enticing for students to be there, right? Not just because they have to be there, but what are they going to get out of the session, and how can it be engaging? So those are some things to think about.
So I'm in agreement with everything that's said, but I also work for the state where we're required to make sure that schools get funded based upon, in Texas, schools get funded based upon their average daily attendance. And so we've put out very specific guidance about what asynchronous attendance needs to look like versus synchronous attendance. I would actually say that completely agree with everything Diane and Katie are saying, but we have to also from a state standpoint, and then I would think from a district standpoint, be very cognizant that it's very easy for us to just forget about our students if they're not showing up in class right away or what have you. So when we create, like, if we're not truly accountable, and this is where an accountability mechanism is very important, if we're not accountable, then they'll fall off the radar pretty easily. Especially if they, and I think the question was about the fact that they potentially don't have Wi-Fi or internet access or devices. And so one of the things that we have been doing with our Texas home learning model, but this new grant will just help us with that more for English learners specifically, is build out resources that can be provided asynchronously. So the idea that you would actually have some paper-based resources that can be provided to parents who may not have access to Wi-Fi, or in remote locations where nobody has access to the type of internet access, that they can still get the same quality of resource. But this is going to be the key where we could actually get them, the parents, the kind of guidance and coaching that they can help support the students, and the teachers to help support the students a little bit more emphatically. So I think that we have to be really cognizant about the accountability we have for English learners. We can't let them drop off the radar. And so we want to make sure that we're accounting for them regularly. And then the next thing is, how do we best count that time that's asynchronous, that may be paper-based? How do we, this is an opportunity for us to re-envision what it looks like, but to be accountable for it at the same time. And that would be my very state level kind of, we can't leave that behind.
No, we can't leave it behind. I wasn't advocating for leaving it behind. It was more about finding a way to measure what students are doing on their own and include that towards the engagement. But we do need to have policies and procedures and tools that can measure offline work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thinking about offline work, this next question, which may be our last one before we have to wrap, we'll see. The question is, how do we ensure that learners continue, quote unquote, doing English after the lesson is over? So how do you continue that engagement outside of the classroom, whether it be virtual or in person?
You design assignments that require that they keep doing English afterwards. So building up collaborative activities between students, having students need to do things after class is over to bring to the next class, and something about learner choice. Everything online is in English. Students can watch videos, they can read things they're interested in, they can look for information that they want to pay attention to. I mean, they can watch skateboarding YouTube videos where the narrator is in English if that's what they like to do. Whatever it is that gets them to pay attention in English to real content is important, and finding ways for them to share that and bring it back to the next collaborative session is the thing that we found through all of the research on distance learning works best for driving engagement out of class.
I mean, I think what, one of the things that even in the Zoom platform, if designed, we could have engaged into multiple classrooms or multiple presentations where we could have experienced. So even just using something as simple as the Zoom platform, teachers can create these opportunities for students to do, I think both Katie and Diane have mentioned the idea that students are not just interacting with the teacher, but also interacting with one another. So how would they actually have these conversations? So when you think about think, pair, share, it can still be done in the platform. And the idea that you would build it critically within the system and that becomes part of your lesson plan, I think is an opportunity. And then the other thing is to Katie's point is pulling in aspects of technology that are YouTube videos or like Duolingo or things like that could actually bring in for an EL to be able to experience some of the information in more authentic ways, and then be able to make your assignments based upon their experiences with those. I think there's some real opportunities with this, and it might actually empower teachers. What I think is we're not going to ever, and nor would we ever want to replace teachers. We can't. But what we can use is the technology to maximize all of the skills that they have to a much higher level. And that would be the goal that we would be trying to get to with using all of these platforms.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with everything that Katie and Matt have shared. And I also think this is, we're talking about opportunities as well to think and pause every now and then and think, what have I learned? What's working, what's not working, and really keep always self-assessing what's going well in my class, and ask your students too, and ask the parents, what's happening? What do you see as beneficial? How is students' English being extended? Just looking at this question, right? And reevaluating constantly. We'll look back on this time, in 10, 20 years and just think, we're all learning, right? And it's when we feel this uncomfortable tension, this is exactly when learning takes place. And we're all going through it right now at many different levels, as an educator, as a colleague, as someone's child, as someone's parent, as aunts and uncles. So it's important to just every so often think, what have I learned? What am I taking forward? When we are all back together face to face, what is it that we're going to take from this experience to make it better, to make sure that we are truly supporting our ELs and their families?
I think that's a great note for us to end on, and it looks like that's all the time that we have for discussion today, but I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us, and of course thank Matt, Katie, and Diane for sharing your experiences and expertise with us today. For those of us in the audience, we hope that you'll join us for future webinars this fall. I know Digital Promise will be coming out with several more, and you can find the updated list at digitalpromise.com/webinars. It's also up on the screen. But thank you all again, and take care.